Hi, welcome to the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings. My name is Barry Sterling Mitchell. My co-host is Ben Dickerson. Today is September 18th, 2024, and we're presenting the rankings for week 2 of the NFL season.
Ben Dickerson, the co-host, that would be me. And before we get started with these rankings, bro, I got 4 who would have thunk it.
Oh yeah? Let me hear them.
Yeah. Who would have thunk it? Derek Carr is statistically the best quarterback in the league.
Yep.
Who would have thunk it? Gardner Minshew has the highest completion percentage so far in the league.
Yep.
Good old porn stash Gardner Minshew. Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield are both undefeated. Who would have thought that at the beginning of the season? And Kyler Murray had a perfect passer rating against the Rams last week.
Yeah, I had that as a note too.
This is a crazy topsy-turvy start to a football season.
Oh man, let me tell you. You mentioned Kyler Murray. I have a note here. This is the first time that the Cardinals have had a 28-point lead in 4 years.
Wow.
I'm telling you. We got so much good stuff to offer the people. Let's get ready to pull up the rankings and start to take a look at who's where. Now, again, these are the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings. These are not the NFL rankings or any ESPN or any other rankings. I rank the teams by average net points. That's win margin. So the team with the highest win margin is ranked first. So it's purely quantitative. There's no opinion and no conjecture. Right, Benny?
Correct.
All right, there we go. No opinion, no conjecture. Let's get ready to go. Okay, Benny, let's start to take a look at these net point power rankings. Now, you'll notice that there's 4 categories. ANP is average net points, APF is average points for, APA, average points against, and ATOD, average turnover differential. So we're going to talk about it, and let's go ranking 1 through 16 in the average net points. As you can see, your top 5 here, we have in first place the New Orleans Saints with an average net points of plus 3,100. Now, you notice how I said plus, and I mentioned that because average net points and average turnover differential can both go positive and negative. Second place, that new guy is already making noise with the LA Chargers at 17 and a half points plus net points. Third place, we have the Minnesota Vikings at plus 14. Fourth place, the Buffalo Bills at plus 13.5. And the Arizona Cardinals bring up the 5th place at 12 and a half points per game on average net points. That's the win margin. So 31 is the win margin for New Orleans, 17 and a half for the Chargers, Minnesota 14, Buffalo 13 and a half, and Arizona. So there's your top 5 right there. Rounding out the rest of the top 16, you have Tampa Bay, Pittsburgh, Seattle, Houston, Kansas City, San Fran, Philadelphia, New England, Detroit, Green Bay, and then Chicago. So those are your top 16 teams. And from the 5th place on down, we go from 10 and a half to 7 and a half. Seattle is 4 and a half. Houston's 4, tied with Kansas City. San Fran is plus 3 and a half. Philly is plus 2. New England plus 1 and a half. Detroit is plus 1, and Green Bay and Chicago tied at 0.5. Okay, so that rounds out the top 16 for average net points. So let's look at the second half and relative to average net points. And as I said before, you'll start to see negative numbers here because, again, if you lost all your games, well, that's what happens. You're in the negative. So we have at 17, the New York Football Jets at minus 3. 18 and 19 tied at minus 3.5. That's Cincinnati and Atlanta. Indianapolis is coming in 20th, tied with Jacksonville at minus 4. Here we have 22nd and 23rd place with Dallas and the Las Vegas Raiders at minus 4.5. Baltimore is coming in surprisingly at -5. Cleveland is at 25th place with -5.5. 26th place is Denver at -6.5. Below them, we have Washington and Tennessee at 27th and 28th place at -7. Miami is 29th place at -9. The New York Giants are at 30th place with -12.5. The LA Rams at 31st place at -18.5. And Carolina in 32nd place with -30. So that means Carolina has been losing in their first two games by an average of 30 points. So there's your rankings from 1 through 32 based on win margin. Okay, who's been kicking whose butt? Got anything to say about that, Benny?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is if people haven't surmised already by your explanation of how we do the power rankings, the teams up at the top are usually the teams that are scoring, obviously winning, scoring more points than they're giving up, and are pretty good on both sides of the ball. That being said, let's just talk about the top three in this particular category. Number one, the New Orleans Saints are 2-0. They very simply are playing lights out on both sides of the ball. That's as simple as you can say it. They were not even really mentioned much in the offseason as being a factor, even in their own division, let alone in the NFC. But they come out like gangbusters, man. These guys are playing really, really well. Again, on both sides of the ball. The number two team, LA Chargers, also 2-2. 2-0, rather, I'm sorry. The Chargers were another team that wasn't expected to be very special. Not saying they weren't expected to be good, not saying they were expected to be bad, but it didn't sound like they were going to be anything special kind of feeling their way. But right now they're 2-0 after just taking out the Carolina Panthers 26-3. So that's a big win margin right there in that one game. The number three team is the Minnesota Vikings. Again, a little surprising, 2-0. Very big win last week for the Vikings and Sam Darnold over the Niners. Last year, Sam Darnold was Brock Purdy's backup. Now he's the starting quarterback again, and he's thriving. DC Brian Flores' defense is sneaky, sneaky good. That's all I got for those top three in that category, sir.
All right, all right. Well, 31-point win margin. And basically, if you've played the Carolina Panthers this year, you probably have a pretty good win margin so far, sad to say. But that's in order to get a win margin like that, you got to score some points, Benny. So let's look at the scoring for the NFL. In first place, those New Orleans Saints, averaging 45.5 points per game. Sheesh. The Arizona Cardinals are coming in second, averaging 34.5 points per game, and then Buffalo at 32.5. Tampa Bay is 28.5, and the Philadelphia Eagles are 27.5 on average. Funny listening to the Philadelphia audience after the Philly loss. They want to get rid of everybody, including the offensive coordinator, but they're in the top five in scoring.
Typical,
absolutely. Kansas City, 26.5 points per game in sixth place. Seventh place, we have Dallas at 26. Seattle coming in, and Minnesota coming in eighth place, 25.5. My Niners are tied with Seattle at 24.5 points. That's ninth and 10th place. Houston and the Chargers tied at 24 points per game. That's 11th and 12th. Green Bay coming in 13th at 22.5. The Jets in the top half at 21.5, tied with Baltimore at 21.5. And the Detroit Lions are averaging 21 points per game. Now, as we go down to the bottom half, at 17th place, we have the Washington Commanders, 20.5 points per game. Indianapolis and Chicago are tied at 18.5 points per game for 18th and 19th place. 20th and 21st place tied at 18 points per game. We have Las Vegas and the Patriots. The Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals are both 17 and a half points per game. Could it be coincidence they're both from Ohio? I don't think so, but it's interesting. Tennessee, 17 points per game. Atlanta, 16 points per game. That's 24th and 25th place. 26, we have Pittsburgh at 15 and a half points per game. Interesting because they're what? 2-0? Are they 2-0?
Who's that?
Pittsburgh.
Yes, yes.
Yes. So they're 2-0 at 15 and a half points per game. That tells you something because if they are 2-0 at 15 and a half points per game, we want to take a look and see what they're doing on defense. Jacksonville, Miami, the Rams all tied at 15 points per game, ringing up the rear at 27, 28th, and 29th place. Denver is 13 points per game at 30th. The Giants and 31st place at 12, and Carolina again in last place at 6.5 points per game. So there's your scoring leadership and lack of leadership with New Orleans and first. What do you got on this group, Benny?
Well, I'm only going to speak on in detail and not a lot of detail because I want to keep this thing moving for us. But the number one team, the New Orleans Saints. And remember, I said before we got started, Derek Carr right now statistically the best passer in the NFL. No doubt about it. Right now, scoring 45.5 points per game on average. Obviously, isn't sustainable, but is damn impressive.
Yeah.
Now, of the rest of the top 15 teams, Arizona, Buffalo, Philly, Kansas City, San Fran, Seattle, Houston, and the Chargers are all getting it done through the air and on the ground. Their offenses are, some of them are very, very balanced, but almost all of them are pretty balanced offenses where they have good run games and the quarterbacks are playing pretty well.
All right, there. Getting it done on both the air. Well, it's going to be interesting. We'll talk about it in another section, but it's going to look like San Fran's going to be doing a lot of groundwork coming up. But we shall see. We shall see. All right, let's move over to defense because defense wins what, Benny?
Championships.
Oh, yeah. And, man, I mean, the LA Chargers, you bring a new coach back into the league, a Harbaugh, and he takes first place in defensive scoring, giving up only 6.5 points per game. Now, I mentioned about Pittsburgh. I said if they're only scoring, what were they scoring, Benny? Like 15 points a game or something like that? We just
Something
looked
like
at
that.
Let's go down real quick. What was where they at? It's 15 and a half points per game, but they are in second place defensively, only giving up an average of 8 points per game. Minnesota, and you said that is that their defense you were talking about was sneaky good?
Brian Flores, B-Flow, Coach B-Flow.
Giving up 11 and a half points per game. New Orleans Saints, 14 and a half points per game. And New England, that defense just never goes away, does it? 16 and a half points per game, rounding out your top five. 6 and 7 are Chicago and Tampa Bay, allowing 18 points per game. Jacksonville and Buffalo are 8th and 9th, allowing 19 points per game. Atlanta and Denver, 10th and 11th, giving up 19 and a half points per game. We have a three-way tie. Seattle, Detroit, and Houston, giving up 20 points per game. That's 12 through 14. And Cincinnati and San Fran are giving up 21 points per game. That's your 15th and your 16th place. Let's move down to the bottom half. Green Bay and Arizona allowing 22 points per game at 17th and 18th place. Indianapolis, Las Vegas, Kansas City tied at 22 and a half points per game. That's 19th through 21st place. Cleveland at 22nd place, allowing 23 points per game. Miami and Tennessee allowing 24 points per game for the 23rd and 24th place. We have a two-way tie. The Giants and the Jets. What's with the New York teams, Benny? 25th and 26th place at 24 and a half points per game. Philly, Now, this is the big dichotomy here, 25.5 points per game. In the next section, we'll talk about the defense for Philadelphia, because I had some questions about Fangio before he came here, and it'll be interesting to hear your remarks on that. Baltimore allowing 26.5 points per game, that's a problem. Now, Washington is not helping the young Jaden Daniels out at all. They're allowing 27.5 points per game, bringing in, what's that, 29th place? Hey, this kind of warmed your heart just a little bit, Benny, seeing Dallas at 30th place, giving up 30.5 points per game.
Considering they were
fan, don't I?
well, considering that the consensus was that they were going to start the season with a very good defense,
Yeah,
not a regular. They were touted as being a top defense.
yeah. Well, the numbers are what they are, man. They're 30th place, right above the LA Rams and the Carolina Panthers, who are giving up 33 and a half and 36 and a half points right there for 31st and 32nd place. So there's your average points against. That's your defense. What do you got on them?
Well, number one team in average points against is the Chargers. They are 2-0. And let's be honest, they've been fortunate to have played the Raiders and the Panthers their first two games. They caught the Raiders before they could get themselves kind of together, because obviously they did get themselves together in week 2. Week 1, they were looking like people were expecting them to look. And obviously the Panthers are just completely overmatched. The number 2 team in points against is the Pittsburgh Steelers at 2-0. They benefited by catching Kirk Cousins in his very first real game action since midway through last season. He hasn't played any real games up until the beginning of the season, and they caught him in week 1. And then they got rookie quarterback Bo Nix, who's still feeling his way, obviously, as an NFL quarterback. So Pittsburgh has been fortunate also. The number 3 team is the Minnesota Vikings. They only gave up 6 to the Giants, which was no surprise to anybody. But then they proved it wasn't a fluke by handling the Niners. Now, the other standouts in this particular category within the top 15 teams, the ones that were expected to be strong defensively are basically New England, Chicago, Tampa Bay, Buffalo, and Houston. The ones that are within the top 15 that are somewhat surprisingly good are Atlanta, Denver, and Detroit.
All right, there. So yeah, Atlanta. So we got some good matchups coming up. So last but not least here, never least, is turnover differential. Average turnover differential, because turnovers lead to points. In first place, the Pittsburgh Steelers, averaging plus 2.5 points per game. Second place, you have the Green Bay Packers, averaging, oh, excuse me, I said points per game. The Pittsburgh Steelers averaging 2.5 turnover differential per game. So that means they're taking it away 2.5 times more than they're giving it up. In second place, we have Green Bay with 2 average turnover differentials. Buffalo and New Orleans at 1.5 come bringing in 4th and 5th place. We then have a 1, 2, 3, 4-way tie from 5th through 8th with Houston, New England, the Chargers, and San Fran, all averaging 1 turnover additional per game. Tampa Bay, Seattle, Dallas, Washington, Chicago, all at 0.5. So that's about a half a turnover differential per game. That takes them from 9 to 13. And then we have a rash of break evens: Arizona, LA Rams, and Cincinnati. That's 14 through 16. And then we drop down to the bottom half. We see Baltimore, Minnesota, and the Jets, again, all breaking even, bringing up 17th through 20th place. A 4-way tie between Carolina and the Giants, and Detroit and Jacksonville at minus a half a turnover differential per game. And then we have a 4-way tie from 24th to 27th place: Kansas City, Atlanta, Miami, and Cleveland all at -1 turnover differential. And we have Denver and Philadelphia at 28th and 29th place at -1.5. I'm sorry, that's a four-way tie. Denver, Philadelphia, Indianapolis, and Vegas at -1.5 turnover differential. And Tennessee, the Titans at -2 as their turnover differential per game. And I keep thinking about what's the name of the Tennessee quarterback
Will Levis.
who keeps wanting to toss the ball. People.
Yo, what the? His coach was pissed.
I don't blame him.
You don't usually see coaches throw players under the bus in the post-game conferences, but he was very upset.
I don't know if this guy's been watching Pat Mahomes tapes and he thinks he can do what Pat does or what he thinks, man. But he ain't gonna last long. He keep doing that. What else you got for the turnovers?
As the young folks say, he's doing too much.
Yeah.
But turnover differential. Number 1, Pittsburgh Steelers. First of all, there's no surprise here. They're 2-0. They're second in average points against, and they've won both games and only scored 1 touchdown. Okay? So that tells you all you need to know about the Pittsburgh Steelers. The number 2 team, Green Bay Packers, they're 1-1. Now, with Jordan Love, when Jordan Love went down, the main thing they needed out of Malik Willis was for him to protect the ball. He's done that so far. So there you have it. They're taking the ball away more than they're giving it away.
Yeah.
And Buffalo at 2-0. One of the big things from the detractors of Josh Allen was how reckless he plays and that he possibly runs too much and has too many turnovers, fumbles, and what have you. Now, he did lose a fumble in game 1, I believe, but his defense has 4 takeaways. So that takes care of that.
That handled it.
Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Benny, the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings looks at every team, 1 through 32, in the 4 categories of net points, points for, points against, and turnover differential. We'll be following this up in week 3. And as you'll see, as you track the changes, especially in the net points, because we've pretty much identified that your playoff teams are going to come from your top 10 to 12, more than likely a top 8 in average net points. So this is going to evolve as the season goes along. But the numbers don't lie. And as I always say, if one team's beating the other team by an average of 25, then, and no other team is beating that team by more than that, you got to give them, some respect, because it ain't easy in the NFL. And even though the New Orleans Saints are starting to try to make it look a little easy, but it's not that easy.
Like I said, what they're doing right now is incredible, but I doubt that it's sustainable.
Well, the sustainability, that's easy for me to say. The sustainability part of it is coming from the run game, I think. I mean, if you're going to sustain something, it's the ability to run the ball like they're running it.
That's the thing. Derek Carr, for the 3rd time, is the best passer in the league right now, but it's only week 2. Alvin Kamara is running like a maniac with his hair on fire, but it's only week 2.
Right.
Something's got to give.
Something's got to give. Well, Benny, let me mention, because we talked about this, and we'll talk about this again in the next segment. I did decide on the number of weeks for what we call the second preseason. And it's funny how I heard so many kind of takes on this from different people. But the one guy said, and he literally said, it takes about 4 weeks for these teams to gel.
I heard that too.
You heard that also?
I know I was saying 3 for my personal, but I heard from somebody else, either on TV or the radio. I didn't make a note of who it was. They clearly said the first 4 games of the regular season are basically the second preseason.
Absolutely. And we've been saying that now for what, years. So
Yep.
I just, we made the thought of changing it since they had 3 preseason games and they stretched out the season to 17 games. But long story short is these guys still have not played together. And these first 4 games, we're going to say, they really are taking their time to get it together. So we're going to take everything that's happened so far, even my rankings, with a grain of salt. All right. So
Yeah, if you see your team low on the list, don't get upset. Don't get upset. It's a long season. They only play 1 game a week. That's what we love about football. You know what I mean? That's what makes it so great and so interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely. So stick with us. Look for us next week, coming out with week 3 of the average net points of the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings. And be sure to visit us at www.sterlingnppr.com and follow us on Facebook. Thanks again.